As more parents become concerned about what their children are learning in schools, the choice to homeschool kids is becoming increasingly popular. Research from the Urban Institute found that between 2019 and 2022, the number of homeschooling families increased by 30%. Why, you might ask? Some parents' reasons include dissatisfaction with the education their kids are receiving, concerns about their school environment, a desire to improve family life together, and increased desires to provide moral and religious instruction to these young minds. With more families homeschooling, some believe that government funds allocated to public schools should be reassessed, and monies should be reallocated to support homeschooling families. One man who has been at the helm of the homeschooling community for decades is Michael Farris, a lawyer who is largely responsible for the legalization of homeschooling nationwide. Farris has also defended numerous parents and families against people promoting radical ideas in schools and in the public square. The founder of Patrick Henry College, Farris also recently served as the CEO of the Alliance Defending Freedom. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. Set the stage for us here. Just how long have we been fighting this battle to protect kids from dangerous agendas in schools and in the broader culture? I know that your experience goes very far back in this.
Well, I became a lawyer in 1976, so that's getting close to 50 years ago, 47 to be precise. And I got involved in the public school side of the battle right out of the gate. Within a year or two after becoming a lawyer, I was litigating cases involving parents' rights in public school and trying to fight back against some of the craziness that was going on, anti-Christian curriculum and other things of that nature. But in 1983, our family had been homeschooling for a year, and I realized there was a need for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So I started fighting homeschool battles in 1983, and the organization that I started, HSLDA, is now 40 years and 6 months old. So it's been a wonderful run, and I stopped being employed there a few years ago when I went to work for ADF, but I'm still the chairman of the board of HSLDA and have been now from the very beginning.
A great organization. And obviously, you know a lot about the problems in public schools. What about private schools? Is it just as bad there, in your view?
Well, it depends on the private school. It can be. The vast majority of secular private schools are just as woke as the public schools. Unfortunately, even some Christian and evangelical and even Catholic schools are a little too woke for what I would be comfortable with for my own children.
Right.
And so I think it's it depends on the school and the faithfulness. There's an old radio preacher named J. Vernon McGee that said there are three kinds of people. There are believers, there are non-believers, and in his Southern twang, there are Mike believers. And so we have to be careful of that in the private school world. And the make-believers are especially dangerous. So there are faithful schools in that regard, and then there are not so faithful schools.
Thank you for sharing that. And we hear a lot about the confusing gender ideologies, the revisionist history that's being spread across American classrooms, subjects that parents widely reject. They don't want their kids exposed to these things. What are the subjects that should be emphasized in a growing child's education?
Well, from an academic perspective, K through 12 education should be about mastering two things and then exposing your child to a number of things. The mastery is two languages, the language of words and the language of numbers. To succeed in life, everybody needs to have a basic mastery of those two things. The more math you go, the higher you go in math, you become more specialized in the sciences and engineering and that sort of thing, and computers. And the higher you go in words, you might, be a lawyer or be a journalist or write stories. But everybody needs a basic mastery of those two languages. And then, you should have an exposure to history, exposure to science, and exposure to literature and other things to enrich your education. But you'll master those things, if at all, at the collegiate level and then even the postgraduate level. So it's mastery of languages, exposure to a lot of good things. But then, from my perspective, the foundation for it all, the fear of the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom. And so having that Christian worldview as the context in which we learn those skills, those exposures, those things that we're going to master. The development of the soul, along with the development of the mind, should not be divorced in my mind. They should be, joined together, and a properly raised child will see both academic success and very importantly, spiritual success.
I love the way how you so clearly laid that out. And how can parents who have chosen to homeschool their children, or even just have taken a more active role in their kids' schools, trying to understand what their kids are being taught, how can parents harness their influence and really change what's happening in our education system, or have we reached a point of no return?
Well, I don't think it's a point of no return, because there have been some very successful school board races where parents have risen up and said, enough of this. I think that the teachers union and the teacher training colleges are, very committed to the opposite ideology. But ultimately, school boards control things, and state legislators and governors have a lot of influence as well. And so the federal government to some degree, but I think it's the state and local that is the bigger and more important fights in the education arena. And so engaging in that level, even if you're a homeschooler, you should be concerned for your neighbor kids, because they're better off if they're receiving good academic education and not an indoctrination in wokeness. Right. And so all of us should be concerned about what is happening in our schools. It's our money that's funding it. And so as good stewards of that money, we need to make sure that schools are doing right by kids. And so there's no substitute for plain old ordinary civic activism.
Right, right. And Michael, we have one more question before I let you go. Obviously, the footprint of homeschoolers here in the United States has grown to be something we may never have imagined. Looking forward, about 10 years down the road, how do you envision American education to be?
Well, on the good side, I hope that there's a lot more choice, that the monopoly of the public school has been broken. We're on the way to achieving that. And if that's the case, the kind of diversity that would be more healthy for our country is intellectual diversity, where you're free to think differently than the mainstream. You're free to think differently than the establishment wants you to think, and you're free to teach your kids in a way that's consistent with that. In fact, I'm not a fan of using international law to govern our country, but it's from time to time, it's interesting ideas that all the basic human rights documents, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, all three of them say that parents have the prior right to educate their children in their own values. And so when parents have the freedom to educate kids in their values, I think the future for freedom, the future for a flourishing country is much better than when we see it in a one-size-fits-all indoctrination, especially in the woke ideology that's controlling so much of the educational sector these days.
It's very fascinating. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an eye-opening discussion. Michael Farris of the HSLDA, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.